All right. Well, thank you so much for joining for this live webinar. And I'm Ashley Brundage, and I'm super excited to bring this conversation to light and represent Be the Transformational Change Fund and our work at BTTC. For those that aren't familiar, Be the Transformational Change Fund is a Delaware national nonprofit organization that specializes in empowering and elevating visibility for LGBTQ people in the United States. And we do that through a various litany of programs from educational content like our Empowered Careers program to the Miss International Queen United States of America pageant for visibility purposes to other programming like this. And we're super honored to partner with advocates for transgender equality, A4TE, and we welcome their amazing team experts. Well, just a couple of them because we couldn't fit everybody in one entire webinar. Wow, it would be so fast. But I wanted to take a moment and introduce our guest speakers to give them a chance to talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. And then we're going to dive into the meat of our program content because we really want to discuss some of the challenges that are facing the transgender community because there are quite a lot, and obviously it changes every day. So just know that going into this, that obviously we're presenting information, but we really want you to utilize as many resources that are out there to find out what's going on. And so with that, I guess we'll go first over to Anya. And hey, Anya, how are you doing? It's so great to see you again.
I'm doing well, Ashley. It's really wonderful seeing you. Thank you so much for having Ez and me and advocates for trans equality for this important discussion. We're really pleased to be here. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in to watch this broadcast of a discussion about some of the important issues that members of the trans community encounter. My name is Anya Marino. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Strategic Programs Officer here at A4TE, which is a really fancy way of saying that I oversee the legal and policy departments here at the organization and work very closely with Ez, who is among our co-interim legal directors, as a thought partner on much of the work that we do here at A4TE. For those who are unfamiliar with A4TE's work, let me provide you just a brief summary of what we do here. What we do is strive to achieve trans liberation to ensure each member of our community maintains equal access and opportunity in all aspects of their lives, right? So we embrace a multimodal approach to accomplish this objective. We advance and defend the rights of trans, non-binary, and gender expansive people through litigation and legal services, federal and state policy advocacy, strategic communications, public education and outreach, community organizing, and electoral engagement. And our work involves sharing our community members' stories in courts, administrative agencies, legislative bodies, institutes of learning, workplaces, prisons and jails, healthcare facilities, places of public accommodation, and in public fora. And we rely on thoughtful discussions around the needs of our community that humanize their experiences while reaching the largest audience possible, which includes, of course, jurists, policymakers, reporters, and other people unfamiliar or sometimes uncomfortable with trans, non-binary, and gender expansive people, which means meeting people where they are and incorporating language and messaging that prompts reflection and critical thinking about gender justice and undermining arcane race and gender stereotypes that have oppressed our community for generations. Again, Ashley, it's so wonderful to be here with you, as I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Oh gosh, thank you so much. And Ez, I'm so excited that you're here as well. And I just want to reiterate really fast too, because I mean, Anya wears a lot of hats, okay? And it's absolutely mind-blowing that you do that many things So I just wanted to give you like a huge shout out for all the stuff because you didn't even mention
Well,
all the volunteer stuff that you do as well, which is also a litany of stuff. So thank you. And
Ashley, thank you very much. As I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
I do want
no.
to
And I'm
say,
sorry.
Ashley, thank you. And to be clear, like, I participate in a lot of what we do, but obviously it's not work that I do on my own. We do it as a huge team, not only here at A4TE, but the work that we otherwise do, you and I, outside of our normal everyday jobs. So,
Yeah,
it really takes an entire community to advance the rights of our community, and each of us really deserves a huge pat on the
yeah.
back for
I
for for
I love
contributing to
it.
that work.
I love it. Thank you. So Ezra, I'm so excited to get to you and sorry for stepping there on your toe. I just was like, wow, this has been really exciting. But go ahead, please tell us
No,
more.
no apologies. Thank you so much for having us, Ashley. It's a real treat to be in conversation with you and with Anya, and sharing information with our community. As Anya said, my name is Ezra Cukor. I'm one of the co-interim legal directors at Advocates for Trans Equality, working with our wonderful legal team to advance the rights of trans and non-binary folks around the nation. Today, I'm really excited to be in conversation with you, and just as a level set, want to say that Anya and I can give legal information that we hope will be helpful. We're not able in this type of broadcast to give legal advice. So for folks who are out there listening, if you want guidance on what to do or your options based on your specific situation, that is a very normal thing to want in moments like these. And I encourage you to speak to a lawyer who's licensed in your state and privately share your situation and goals. But now we'll get into it and give some legal information and updates. And that is also an important piece of the puzzle of taking care of ourselves and our communities in this time, together with other types of mutual aid and self-care that trans folks have so long relied on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I just think that especially as we're going to dive into some of the issues now, I think it's really important also for those of you that are allies out there, right? Obviously a lot of we're marketing, right? You're here watching. Thank you. Thank you for being an ally. But know that it's expensive. It's very expensive to fight legal battles in the world. And so this is kind of why we want you to have an awareness as an ally. You might not be the person that's going to show up in the courtroom, right, or guide someone, but to be able to acquire those resources, that's really important too as well. I think it's important to mention that. So I want to dive into the first major issue, and obviously the Supreme Court of the United States of America is out there, and obviously we've seen decisions from them related to transgender rights really over the past 8 years. And some have been positive, some have been negative, right? And obviously we've seen kind of the parameter on that. But really, in relation to healthcare, I know that this has been something that's caused a lot of people a lot of emotional distress. Can we talk a little bit about kind of how the most recent ruling and how does that impact and affect states with laws or executive orders relating to protecting access to gender affirming care? And maybe we'll start there.
Sure, I can start off here, and Anya, of course, please chime in. So when we're thinking about the number of states that have chosen to pass legislation or take executive action to protect trans folks and our access to transgender related healthcare, the recent Skrmetti decision doesn't have a legal effect. And I can unpack a bit why. So in Skrmetti, what had happened is one state, Tennessee, had banned best practice medical care for trans youth, and families and providers and affected folks challenged that under a number of legal theories. One of them was equal protection, so the part of the Constitution that guarantees us equal protection of the law. And that part of their challenge made its way up to the court. Unfortunately, it was a loss that let Tennessee's ban on best practice medical care for trans youth stay in place. And that is devastating. And that was the only issue that was before the court. So in the number of states that have, through their legislature, enacted protections for gender affirming care, which can take a number of forms. Those protections still stand unaffected and become critically important for the residents of those states and really for all of us as a possibility model. And so to talk a little bit about protections, if that's okay, you know, a number of states have passed protections for public accommodations, so protections against discrimination based on sex, specific protections based on discrimination based on gender identity or expression, and then on a range of other areas that can be of critical importance to trans folks accessing public places, because of course we are multifaceted people with multifaceted identities. And so a number of states have public accommodation laws that in many cases cover access to healthcare through places like doctors' offices, hospitals, health systems. Some states have protections in their insurance laws that also protect our access to health coverage, which of course is a vital part of getting healthcare for most of us. And then some states have also gone forward and passed what are called shield laws to try to protect providers who provide healthcare or patients who receive healthcare in a state with a shield law or a shield executive order against intrusions from hostile states. Those are a relatively new form of civil rights protection that we've seen develop in the wake of the overturning of the right to abortion and states passing bans on gender affirming care or trans-related healthcare. And if you're wondering, as you said and watch this broadcast, if there is a public accommodation law that might cover your access to healthcare or a shield law, the Movement Advancement Project or an ACLU affiliate or a local lawyer in your area that does trans rights work is a great place to start. It's a dynamic and changing situation. And so checking those sources and rechecking those sources as you have questions or make decisions about your life is really important. And I just want to end with noting, you know, the Scrimetti decision did not have a legal effect on shield laws or affirmative protections for trans folks, but we also have to live with the practical realities, right? For Tennesseans who are affected by the devastating loss in Scrimetti, their medical needs don't change just because the government has stigmatized or disfavored or banned healthcare. So as a practical matter, in states with shield laws and protections, it's incumbent on those states to step up and make sure those protections are fully realized and accessible to trans folks who live in the states or who may need to travel to the state. And for those of us who live in states without protections and shield laws, it's incumbent on us to support each other in working to get there.
I love it. Thank you. Anya, you have some thoughts on this one?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I agree with everything that Ez has said. I mean, the issue before the court was a relatively narrow one and specific to the ban that existed in Tennessee. And as has already noted, challenges against other bans are going to have to be addressed on their merits. And also, many states otherwise maintain either statutory or constitutional protections that would otherwise safeguard an individual's access to care. In addition to that, there are some federal statutes that otherwise safeguard an individual's access to care, specifically in the instance of adults or in some instances minors that oftentimes are employees, right? You know, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in places of employment. And that includes ensuring that all employees have equal access and privileges of employment. And among those privileges of employment, oftentimes are healthcare benefits. And so an employer is obligated in those instances to ensure that they are providing access to healthcare in a way that is equivalent to the needs of all individuals, regardless of whether someone is cisgender or transgender. So it shouldn't have an impact in cases involving certainly Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And while we're already having a discussion around the legal implications or wider implications of what the Scrimetti decision may mean, and in many ways, as we've already noted, it is a narrow decision. I think it's important to kind of undergird some of the themes that are kind of or rather to emphasize some of the themes that are undergirding what is happening in bans against this healthcare. And we're not only seeing it certainly in bans that effort to restrict access to care for children, but we certainly see the administration otherwise trying to undermine federal employees' access to healthcare more broadly. And we most recently saw efforts in the United States Congress to undermine access to coverage of trans people's healthcare needs through budget reconciliation. Fortunately, that failed, but the reality is that there are many within the federal government that are still efforting to undermine access to this care. So let's talk about kind of what the broader themes are here, right? So the reality is that Western culture more broadly, really relies on extremely rigid gender binaries. And that involves medical practice. Indeed, the history of medical practice in Western culture is riddled with cruelty, voyeurism, and misogyny. And anyone who wasn't assigned male at birth suffered abusive medical practices historically here in the United States. So, for example, the now abandoned diagnosis of female hysteria is responsible for much of the stigma and obstacles women were required and are still required to overcome to receive competent medical care in this country. And understanding female hysteria's negative impact means acknowledging that the diagnosis was attributed really to anything a woman did that wasn't viewed as acceptable behavior for an individual assigned female at birth. And that could be anything from having excessive emotion to an increased or decreased sex drive, or an increased appetite, or an increased heart rate or pulse, or an interest in unnaturally male academic hobbies. I mean, the list is on and on. And so we saw the ways in which historically anyone who was an assigned male at birth did not have ownership over the body. And this is especially true also for those who are women of color. So if we look at gynecological advancements here in the country, they oftentimes involved violence and misogyny. So for example, Dr. James Marion Sims is said to have tortured at least 12 enslaved Black women and young girls between 1845 and 1849 and performed endless surgeries on these women without their consent. And in his autobiography, Sims described negotiating with enslavers to experiment on these women's reproductive anatomy without any anesthetic. So the reality is all of this is tied together, and we have to acknowledge that history if we're going to also address the existing efforts to undermine access to gender-affirming care presently.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about the historical nature of what you're talking about, but I didn't really link them together as you've done so eloquently. I think that the healthcare concerns, related for the transgender people in America, obviously are being impacted because, the Supreme Court case ultimately, right? And I think as you kind of put a hit on it when you were talking about in relation to youth and how that definitely, right, doesn't necessarily enact any kind of ban for adults, but it seems to me that there's a lot of organizations that are using this ruling as a way to kind of pull back. Can you maybe touch on that for just a second, or have you seen this? Because I mean, I've seen it as an advocate from people telling me, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, the unfortunate reality, as Anya said, is that there are some folks who have really dedicated significant time and money to trying to take healthcare away from trans folks, youth or adults. It is a bit mind-boggling to think about, devoting oneself to doing that. And unfortunately, we have seen many of those anti-trans advocates cite the Skermeti decision as additional support for their ends. I don't think it provides a legal basis to do that. And so, a feature of our legal system is it's adversarial in nature. So, our opponents are trying to twist or extend the Skermeti decision that was really quite narrow. And that is one thing that's happening. And then we're seeing folks who support trans folks' access to healthcare coming in with different strategies that have been building and will continue to build. And so, for example, trans advocates in Montana, led by Melita Picasso of the ACLU, are brought, even before Scometti, a state constitutional challenge to protect access to trans healthcare against the state ban that should be unaffected by Scometti. And other folks might use different legal theories or might use out-of-court theories like legislative advocacy, organizing, showing up in different ways to get us all the healthcare we deserve. And while all this is happening, the courts, the lower courts, right? So the district courts where trials happen and the intermediate appeals courts, which are between the lower courts and the Supreme Court, will be taking into account the Scometti decision as they move forward. And our work as trans folks and allies is to keep our eye on the ultimate goal, which is everyone having access to the healthcare they need based on the recommendation of their health providers without interference by government.
Yeah, that would be great, right? You said something that struck a chord with me as well. I just wanted to hit this back for just a quick second. The term narrow, and especially because a lot of people watching might not be legal experts or someone deeply rooted. Obviously, there's a decision in the Supreme Court, and there's a for or against, right? As far as there's so many judges that'll say yes or no, right? And that's not the narrow part that you're talking about, right? You're talking about the actual verbiage of the decision and what they're saying, right? Just so that way we're clear, right? I just want to make sure. Okay, I said you're both nodding.
Yes, that I'm nodding. Yes, that exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because, obviously some people are going to be watching don't really understand that terminology. So I just want to just throw that one out there. I do want to shift gears a little bit and touch a little bit on allyship because I know and thank you to those who are part of our community, but thank you also to the allies that you're watching right now. Um, share this with like 5 or 10 people, so that way they can realize all of the things that that our community has to navigate on a day-to-day basis. I think it would be really helpful for them to have this general awareness. But can we talk a little bit maybe quickly about maybe the best course of action that an ally can do to really make a difference in the current climate that we're experiencing? Because we are, experiencing a little heavy on the not so good climate.
So there are several things that being a good ally, or rather a good ally can do, right? The first really involves allies who are providers of care or work at institutions that provide care, right? And what I would say there is in scenarios in which there is some discussion within your institution where you work or in your practice where you provide care of an effort to engage in what would otherwise be considered pre-compliance, especially in scenarios in which the federal government is threatening to investigate your practices because you are providing care to adults or you are providing care to children in jurisdictions that authorize that care. What I would say to you in those scenarios is don't engage in pre-compliance. I would encourage you to be courageous and to continue providing the care that you should otherwise be required to provide, either under existing state non-discrimination provisions. As noted, there are certain state statutes that prohibit discrimination in places of public accommodation, and there are many states that qualify hospitals and medical practices as institutions that provide public accommodation to individuals, and so they have an obligation to essentially continue providing care under those statutes, and would encourage them to do so. Another thing that I would say, however, is to go ahead and reach out to local counsel to address how to best combat efforts by the federal government to investigate practices that are ongoing in states that enshrine access to care presently. Another thing that I would say is just more broadly for those who want to engage in good allyship is to pause and listen, right? And what I mean by that is to take a moment and actually listen to the experiences of trans and non-binary people and what plights they suffer, right? And what they need to make themselves feel whole in many ways. And what I mean by make themselves feel whole, what I mean is, in essence, to get the relief that they need from whatever they're suffering, right? Um, because the reality is, oftentimes we have many people who are well intentioned, who want to do things on behalf of the community, who don't necessarily speak to community members who aren't engaged with them, and then effort to do something without actually asking, one, is this what the community wants? And two, does this actually serve the community's needs? And so what I would say is, as a preliminary matter, you need to check in with the community in your area and identify if this is what they actually want and need. The second thing I would also say is recognize that the trans community is not monolithic, right? And also that all issues that impact any individual on a regular basis oftentimes impact members of the trans community, right? And so they're oftentimes suffering certain plights that are compounded not only because they happen to be a member of the trans community, but because other people are also suffering those issues also, right? So access to healthcare is something that many people here in the United States struggle with on a daily basis, right? Economic security is something that many people here in the United States struggle with quite regularly. Employment security is something that many people struggle with here in the United States regularly, right? Family and domestic disputes are issues that people struggle with regularly. And those are the same issues that members of the trans and non-binary community also struggle with as well. But it's also compounded oftentimes with the reality that there is still pervasive persecution and discrimination of trans and non-binary people across the country, especially in rural and southern jurisdictions. So that's something to keep in mind. And then finally, what I would say is, in addition to listening, provide trans and non-binary people the platform to speak and to share their thoughts and ideas. And also recognize that if they tell you that they're uncomfortable in that moment sharing them, don't press them further, right? Because it may be an opportunity for them to just be able to feel safe, and that's what they're looking for. Ez, do you have anything to add to that?
I did have a clarification thing, though. Okay, I'm gonna slide in here for just a quick second. You said counsel when you early on you're referring to places to go. What can you elaborate just a second on what you were meaning by that?
Sure. When I was talking about providers that administer gender affirming care to members of the community, if they have specific questions around investigation or an effort to essentially, or others' efforts to undermine access to care in their areas, what I meant by seeking out legal counsel was speaking to an attorney.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
There we go. Just Ezra, what do you think? Any other things you had? And also, maybe you have something specific out there for allies of youth, because I know that that's a hot issue as well.
Yeah, look, I think everything Anya said is powerful and important when we're thinking about trans people across the life spectrum and especially youth. I think what I would sort of lift up again, or related to what you said, Anya, is I think it's so important for us all to advocate in our spheres of inclusion. And that could be like your school, your church, your workplace, your community organization, to really think about, okay, healthcare, and then what other things can we do to make our sphere respectful and inclusive of trans and gender diverse young people and the like whole range of diversity of the human experience. So that can look like, listening and checking in with trans communities. And as Anya said, advocating for changes in policy. And it can look like working in coalition to work to strengthen access to healthcare in the first place for low-income folks. But, whatever you can do in your sphere of inclusion is really important right now. And trans youth not only deserve access to affirming healthcare, but also to be affirmed and respected in all aspects of their lives.
Yeah. I love that. And you also refer to this term sphere of inclusion. Can you just elaborate on that for just a second too?
Yeah,
Because
I
I
think
like
that
that.
so I think we all move in so many different places, right? Like, I think so for example, you might not be able to pass a shield law in your state right now. That might be a project that's going to take years and years. But can you step back and say, okay, what about my workplace? Can I move the needle to make sure that insurance coverage is as inclusive as it can be within the laws of my state, which, you should be able to. In fact, because our civil rights laws in many cases require it, you should be able to have trans inclusive health coverage in your workplace. Many Americans get our health coverage through our own work or someone else's work. So that can be one space. And then for folks who live in states where there might be restrictions or bans on best practice healthcare for trans youth, thinking about not only the insurance coverage angle, but what other things can you do to make sure that folks who might not be able to get their healthcare in state are actually able to enjoy health coverage that is meaningful through an employer. And that can look like any number of adjustments in policy or coverage to make sure that folks have the ability to go where they need to go to get healthcare. So that could look like making sure to do a bunch of things that actually all employees would benefit from, right? Like having adequate sick time, having adequate sick time that you can take to care for a family member. In the wake of some states banning abortion, we saw some employers finding creative ways to make sure folks would be able to travel and have funds to travel. So think creatively in a sphere where you feel that you can be an advocate and make a difference.
So, like, really everyone else that you're connected to and how you know them or work with them or talk to them, it's kind of, I think that back in the day, I think growing up, I think my parents referred to this as sphere of influence. Right? Are we talking about the same thing, right? All the spaces
Yeah,
and
I think so.
places that you move, everyone that you talk to, who do you know? What do you know? Are you are you writing your politician? Are you writing your CEO? Are you writing your healthcare person that writes the plan? Who is it, and how many times are you touching every single person in the way that you can with the text or the phone call? And yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing. Um, so, Anya, maybe we can pivot to talk a little bit more, maybe about workplace issues. I know that this is a topic that comes up a lot for our community. It's a big part of Be the Transformational change in our programming around kind of trying to eliminate barriers in the workplace. So we do a lot of educational programming. Um, Earlier this year, we did an entire program called Own Your Story, and we presented on how you could communicate and you leverage all of your multimedia resources here, right? We all have the phone, so everyone is like from the media in this current world that we operate in. Can you just talk a little bit, maybe as both of you or as legal experts, kind of I'm thinking about going to work in somewhere, like, oh boy. I want to find the best place to work at, right? I mean, I can look for the sign that says best place to work because someone gave them that. But how do I really know? And is there something I can ask to find out? Sorry.
So, just as a starting point, I think it's important to just emphasize again that the court's recent decision in Scrimeti does not change the protections that an individual maintains as an employee in their place of employment. And indeed, one of the things that this Scrimeti decision did is acknowledge the court's previous decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, which is a watershed decision in which the Supreme Court acknowledged that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, color, religion, and sex in places of employment, prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in places of employment too, because sex contemplates both sexual orientation and gender identity. And the reality is that applies to all privileges and benefits of employment, and also the hiring and firing of individuals. So the reality is that Title VII still prohibits an employer from subjecting a trans individual to discrimination in their places of employment because they are trans. In addition to that, what I would say is, and I think this is really important to stress, that notwithstanding the White House's efforts to undermine diversity, equity, and inclusion programming in places of employment, an executive order coming from the White House is not a royal decree. And a Title VII of the Civil Rights Act still prohibits, again, as I've already said, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of a series of protected classes, inclusive of that is sex, and contemplated within the meaning of sex is sexual orientation and gender identity, right? And so one of the ways that we address, or rather combat, discrimination in the workplace is through diversity, equity, and inclusion programming to help people understand that, of course, a workplace is not itself monolithic either. And there are people who maintain various perspectives, experiences, backgrounds that come into the workplace, and they all strive to support that workplace's mission, right? And that's really what Title VII and diversity, equity, inclusion are all about, ensuring that an employer has access to the most qualified and eligible potential employees to do the job moving forward, right? So the reality is the White House's efforts to undermine DEI practices are actually contrary to better business practices, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you get access to the best people who are eligible for the job. When it comes to individuals who are looking to identify workplace cultures that are going to embrace them as they are, I think one of the things that I would encourage members of our community to do, and for allies to do, is to seek out employers that still embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, right? And the reason that I say that is now is not a time to capitulate to the unlawful practices of the president or his administration. Now is a time to demonstrate courage and an opportunity for those who recognize justice and equality to really ensure that they are providing workplaces where each employee feels valued, heard, and safe. And that's something that we want all employees to feel in the workplace, because the reality is most of us spend most of our everyday lives at work. It's where many of us get a sense of our own self-worth from the work that we do and contribute to our workplaces, right? And so we want to ensure that we maintain workplaces that provide that sense of value and safety and respect for individuals who come to it, especially those who are trans, non-binary, gender expansive, lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex, and other individuals outside of the alphabet mafia, if you will, or the rainbow mafia, if you want to call it, right? So the reality is, like, you want an inclusive workplace, and you want a workplace culture that embraces people for who they are and recognizes that the value that their differing experiences and backgrounds and education provide to the workplace, right? Because it only encourages innovation and creativity, which is what we all want in workplaces.
Yeah.
As a potential employee of a workplace, what you can do, in addition to kind of identifying employers that have posted DEI practices is also reach out to existing employees at said workplaces and see what the culture is like from their perspective, right? Do they have a good experience working there? Have they heard of other incidents internally that suggest that perhaps it might not be the best place for you, right? And in scenarios in which you are in a workplace and you are subject to disparate treatment because of your sexual orientation or gender identity or other protected characteristic, whether that is your race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, genetic information, actually, as well, to document all of that information, right? To document what is happening, and to also reach out to a local attorney who practices employment law about what relief may be available to you, and to assess the strength of any claim that you may have against your existing employer if you are indeed subject to discrimination in the workplace.
So there's a lot to unpack here. Thank you. I'm just thinking about this from the standpoint of, you're in that scenario and you're thinking about working somewhere. So to that point, I would definitely 100% agree. See if they have a DEI program. Yeah, that's an immediate parameter level setter to know. You don't have to out yourself as trans. I mean, I can tell you that I did that like 15, 16 years ago. And wow, it was a wild roller coaster. I got 40 really nasty no's. And I had doors slammed in my face and people called the cops on me and stuff. And, that was kind of my experience. Um, Eventually I found a yes. I mean, it could be that hard in theory. You don't have to out yourself. You don't have to do those things if you don't want, but you need to do what is best comfortable for you. I don't know. This is just kind of my expertise since this is kind of really a big lane that I move in and helping people. But talk it through with the coach, talk it through, send me a message. I'll meet with you and chat with you if you're kind of just in a weird place about this and wanting to know what's best for you. Should you hide? Should you not hide? I mean, and there's a lot of parameters, and you got to really talk it over with someone who's been in that scenario before. Um, and Ezra, maybe you could kind of just touch really quickly on the, where if you're facing a discrimination, maybe because I know that this is definitely in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, no problem. And I think, look, building on what Anya said, because she really started things off on exactly the right note, and then I'll unpack a little. And building on what you said also, Ashley. But so if you are facing discrimination at work or potential discrimination at work, I think the two very most important things you can do, like Anya said, is document. So anti-discrimination law, whether it's federal, state, or local, typically puts the burden on the person experiencing discrimination to demonstrate that is what is going on to get legal relief. I'm speaking in huge generalizations here, but the reason I share that generalization is, documenting what's happening and what about the situation leads you to believe that it's discrimination, whether it's discrimination based on your race, your trans status, your religion, disability, status as a parent, which is covered in some situations. It is really important to document things in a way that'll be accessible to you later and that is not in your employer's, computer system. So do it outside your workplace system. The other thing is seek out at minimum legal information and ideally really a conversation with with a lawyer who's licensed in your area. For many of us, the thought of hiring a lawyer is cost prohibitive. So, if you're one of those people, legal aid organizations or bar associations sometimes can point you to at least information, if not representation that's accessible to folks of modest means. And the reason is, unfortunately, the reality is workers face discrimination, they face other types of mistreatment, and the deadlines and what laws apply to you can be a really fact-specific thing to sort out. And deadlines can be quite short, right? So for example, if you're a federal employee wanting to bring an anti-discrimination claim, you have a very, very short window to start that process. And so talking to a lawyer early can help you understand what you need to do, what taking the steps to get legal relief might look like. It might also, you might be experiencing potential discrimination. There might be other things that you can do legally or other workplace laws that might offer some help or relief in that situation. So there are wage and hour laws. There are laws in some cases protecting medical leave. And so talking to a lawyer can help you sort out like, okay, what are my options here? And then the other thing I really wanted to unpack is what you said, Ashley. Getting other types of support can also be really critical. So workplace anti-discrimination protections are super, super important. I am so grateful to our predecessors in civil rights work who got those passed and made them possible. And they're really like one piece of what we all deserve in terms of relief from discrimination and feeling welcomed and whole and supported in working and earning our wages. So, you may, if you face discrimination, opt to go forward with a legal process. You may opt to go forward with a legal process and support yourself in other ways. Or you may just opt to not go forward with a legal process.
Yeah.
All of those are valid choices. And talking to a lawyer early and figuring out what your options are can put you in a better place to make the very best you can out of an awful situation.
Yeah, I know we got some questions coming in, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so I definitely want to just rapid fire a few here. Someone was asking specifically about identity documents, because I know this is a big thing that's come up. Obviously, there was a whole passport thing, and the State Department wasn't issuing passports for people with trans past in some ways, depending on their identity documents that they submitted for the passports. And I know that there was a injunction, but maybe someone can sum that for me better than me.
So I can take a stab at it, and as if I forget anything, please by all means feel free to jump in. So the court's ruling really involves two classes, right? Those whose gender identity is different from the sex assigned to them under the passport policy, or who have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and who want a passport with an M or an F that is different from what the passport policy otherwise required. And then collecting damaged passport. And applications to renew a passport or change information on an existing passport can be mailed. Now, whether you are applying in person or by mail, members of the class must complete a PDF version of the application to access relief through the court-ordered injunction, and must submit the attestation with their application. I know that is a huge mouthful of information that I provided there. So what
No,
I
it's
would
helpful.
say is I'd encourage people to actually go to the questions and answers section of the ACLU's litigation in Orr versus Trump that provides a detailed explanation of what the court order was and the process for obtaining a passport that reflects one's authentic self.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you can contribute?
Just emphasizing the ACLU is litigating this case that was able to get preliminary relief, not just for the plaintiffs, but also class wide, which is how trans folks can go in this moment and continue to get correct passports so they reflect our genders. And the case is being litigated right now. And so things could change really rapidly. So if you are listening to this now and know that you'll be fixing to travel internationally a few months from now and, putting off addressing a passport until a later date, at that later date, when you're fixing to go deal with your passport.
Yeah.
Check the FAQ. Things could have changed.
Yeah. Go now. Go now, aka go now. And I think that also this might be a good time just to mention there's so there are so many moving parts in relation to each state by state, and you all have an amazing state by state guide um, around the laws around changing your identity documents, right? There's a resource page, right?
Yeah, a number of places provide information about correcting identity documents for trans folks, and I can speak to that. I want to circle back on one passport thing before I get there that I apologize I didn't think about earlier. Unfortunately, the State Department represented in one of its public filings and litigation that they would seek to reverse gender marker changes if they're able to get the if they prevail, basically. So if they are able to undo the relief that the plaintiffs in the ACLU has won. So that is something for folks to know when deciding how to navigate whether now is the time for you to update or renew a passport, etc. So check out those FAQ and go in eyes open. In terms of state documents, unfortunately, a number of states have become more hostile to trans folks correcting our gender markers over the years. So, for example, Florida, Texas, and Kansas are places that have all become more restrictive and made it difficult to impossible to for trans folks to correct the gender on some identity documents. Other states have moved in a direction that makes it easier for us, that removes barriers to getting identity documents that reflect who are correct facts and how we live and move through the world. So if you're looking for information on your state, it is a fluid environment at the state level as well as at the federal level. I encourage you to go to many sources. So we're working on some updates for our Advocates for Trans Equality Identity Document Center, and that is rolling through. The Movement Advancement Project also has a similar resource where folks can check the driver's license, birth certificate, et cetera, correction policies for states. So check that out. And then from those sources, it's important also to check the actual law and policies of the state you're planning to make a correction in, because things are in some areas changing so rapidly. And a local attorney or a local legal aid attorney can be very helpful for you in that process.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I definitely just wanted to hit on that really quickly because I know that was a common question that we get asked a lot. Ezra, any other closing thoughts that you just wanted to share? Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to give you a chance to say goodbye to as well. So I know we're wrapping up on our time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really great to be in conversation with you, Ashley. Thanks a lot. And look, I think the closing thought I have is, as trans people know who we are, an identity document can affirm that or not, and the government can't change who you are. We are who we are. We deserve to be respected. We're all working for us to get to that world, and unfortunately, there is a long history of trans folks having to navigate the world with incorrect or mismatched identity documents. And so our communities, and particularly our elders and trans history, provides a rich source of hope and support to me in this moment.
Thank you. And Anya, what do you closing? Thank you so much as well.
Ashley, again, thank you so much for having us both for this important conversation, and thank you to Be the Transformational Change for doing this really important programming for our community. I think my final thoughts are this. There are moments when we as trans people are going to feel frightened or discouraged, right? And I think given the climate in which we're operating now, it's reasonable to feel that way. I'm not going to say it's okay because none of us should have to feel that way. So it's not okay. But it's reasonable to be afraid. It's reasonable to be concerned. It's reasonable to have uncertainty, especially given how rapidly things are changing and just how overt the hostility is against our community. For many of us, this is the first time that we've experienced this level of overt hostility by the federal government, right? But as Ezra already noted, this isn't the first time in trans history, certainly in LGBTQ plus legal history here in the United States, where we've seen overt government hostility against our community. Whether we're talking about trans people more specifically, or whether we're talking about more broadly the LGBTQI plus community. And the reality is that irrespective of efforts to essentially erase our ability to traverse public life, those efforts have ultimately failed. At least that's what history has taught us, over time and again. And I think that's reason to have hope. Another reason to have hope, in my eyes, is the way that younger generations understand what it means to be a member of our community and the ways in which they're showing up for members of the LGBTQI plus community. I think anecdotally of what happened when Virginia Governor Youngkin and State Attorney General Mayari efforted to essentially, institute anti-trans policies in public schools across the state of Virginia. And what we saw in Virginia was a walkout of students across the entire state. And I think back to what my classmates would have done when I was a K through 12 student. And I can say with confidence, I don't think one student would have walked out in protest to support my ability to have access to sex separated spaces that are consistent with my affirmed gender, or to otherwise be treated with dignity and respect in school. And so I do think that there is indeed a shift that we're seeing amongst people. And that's what certainly gives me hope right now.
I love it. I love closing with hope. Thank you both so much for an amazing time together. I can't thank you enough. And also big thank you to A4TE Advocates for Trans Equality. The work that you all are doing is really protecting us and shaping a positive future. So I'm hopeful. And thank you for tuning in. And we're excited to connect with you on more of our programming for Be the Transformational Change. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.